Great to see you here.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Arshadi. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Umar, I'm going to introduce you to the audience. I'm sure they're very, very curious. You're a blogger, right? Who takes special interest
Yes,
in history, philosophy, and geopolitics, right?
yes, I do.
I have
Yeah,
known you from the days you co-founded Vicharak. It was very popular,
yes,
right? It's an organization that
yeah,
spreads awareness about social evils, right? Which we will discuss sometime,
yeah,
social evils in society.
sure.
And you're currently now serving as its vice president, right?
Yeah, you can see right. Yeah,
And you're also the co-host of the online talk show Choosing the Red Pill,
yes,
right?
yes,
So your write-ups have been published in several portals, right? Daily O, I've been reading you for I think many years now, and Firstpost,
mhm.
and of course our
Yes,
Heartland
they recently
Analyst,
published.
right?
Yes, our very own. So, Arindam, that is a sweetheart, actually.
Right.
Yeah, he's a very nice guy.
And when you're not writing articles on culture and religion, you're basically playing drums. And I've heard some of your renderings, and you're writing raps
Yeah,
also, right? It's raps
rap
or
sometimes.
rap
Yeah,
songs.
yeah, it's rap,
It's supposed to be
rap
raps,
songs, rap.
rap songs, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Now, uh, we are going to discuss the importance of secularism in the 21st century. Uh, let's take it like this. Secularism came to me, it came from the US and the French traditions. क्योंकि आगे हम डिस्कस करने वाले हैं सेक्युलरिज्म इन एंशिएंट इंडिया, तो फॉर द टाइम बीइंग जस्ट फॉर कन्वर्सेशन से ये मान के चलते हैं कि द आइडिया ऑफ
mhm,
सेक्युलरिज्म केम फ्रॉम द यूएस एंड द फ्रेंच ट्रेडिशंस, राइट? नाउ
right.
France's interpretation of separation of the church and state, it's diametrically opposite to the US tradition. ठीक है ना? And this confuses a lot of people. US में क्या
Right.
था? चूंकि immigrants, the US is made of immigrants mostly, basically, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and those immigrants were basically being religiously persecuted. तो जब यूएस
Mm-hmm.
कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना, उन्होंने अपना फर्स्ट अमेंडमेंट उसमें डाल दिया. इट वाज बेसिकली टू प्रोटेक्ट द राइट्स ऑफ अ ग्रुप. Hence, US
Mm-hmm.
secularism is all about giving the rights of groups to follow their religion. And this is something that
Right.
even India has, right?
Mm-hmm.
In France, the history has been different. The French Revolution and everything, they had the clergy, and the clergy basically trampled upon the rights of the individuals. तो फ्रांस का बेसिकली क्या रहता है कि वहां पे एक सिस्टमेटिक रिफ्यूजल है, ठीक है, पब्लिक अथॉरिटीज का, कि किसी भी रिलीजन का सिग्निफिकेंस रिकॉग्नाइज नहीं होता है. So they are basically trying
Mm-hmm.
to have no interference from any religious group on their political matters. In the US, it's the opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
hence in France they ban all religious symbols like the Islamic veil, and hence you have Charlie Hebdo, caricaturing all religions, right?
Yeah.
Now, keeping these two things in mind, what is your view about this? Of course, secularism is important, right? How
Right.
important? Which approach is important? The US approach or the French approach?
Okay, so I think it's a very broad and interesting question. And what is the importance of secularism in 21st century? First of all, there is a lot of misconception and confusion amongst people about the basic meaning and definition of secularism, mostly because it does not mean only one thing, as you had also demonstrated just now. It is not, it is a collection of ideas, different, but we will have to go to the actual root where it's coming from. The root of the word secularism was, coined by George Holyoake, and in his own definition, he says that secularism is not by definition anti-religion. He says that secularism is basically indifferent to religion. So this is the basic misunderstanding that some people have, that if someone is secular, he is basically against anything. But basically, it is not against anything; it is pro something. So that is the basic, I think, understanding that needs to be developed. And coming to before we can discuss the importance in 21st century, we have to see that how the reason and the cause for the secularism to develop, how it developed, what are the reasons and causes. So naturally, how the human society evolved, we started depicting ritualistic behavior after, since last 50,000 years ago or 80,000 years ago, there have been caves where people and humans of all different species that were available, they were demonstrating different behaviors. So naturally, religions developed, and in different parts of the world, they had different approach to God and to explain nature. And after that, when different approaches became different religions in due course of time, now when those people met and they shared boundary, either a national boundary or in a town or a city, the natural question is that who will govern and by whose laws the society will be governed. So that is, I think, a very, it's a basic instinct of humans to understand, and how we have actually concluded to the idea of secularism, where it originates from. So basically, it originates from peaceful coexistence, sort of. Otherwise, if one society or if one culture or community claims to have a monopoly over laws, it is going to create friction in the society naturally. So I think that is where the concept of secularism came into being in very infant stages. We can go into a lot of details, which I don't think is necessary in this particular video, about the classical Hellenistic philosophy of secularism. They interpreted it in different way. And after that, the Western world actually gave up on secularism for centuries because of, Christianity or other reasons. And then it re-emerged in the Western world through French Revolution or the Renaissance movement. So what is that need that this idea is emerging in different parts of the world? We are going to discuss how it originated in India, also completely independently of the West. They have their own understanding of secularism. So what is so special about this idea that it keeps originating in different civilizations completely independently, and then it goes down in history and then it re-emerges? So basically, like I said, the importance in 21st century is that in this globalized world, when people are getting connected in a better way than in the history of human civilization, we are connected, we get to know about different cultures and beliefs and faiths, and we develop an understanding that someone's faith might be as important to him as my faith is important to me. So this understanding developed more after, I would say, globalization, or in a more recent terms, internet. It is a phenomenon. So today, in today's world, if we are looking at the secularism in a French way, for example, which was the direct consequence of the French Revolution, that complete separation of religion and state, or being indifferent to it in a way. So that definition is sort of a crux of more than 2,500 years of philosophical journey of the West, from Greece till French Revolution. It is the crux, it is the gist, it is the conclusion, the final result of that journey. And I think people who are born after that, they actually reap the benefits of that fruit, because before that, if any society claims monopoly over truth, they can actually govern however way they want. So today, uh, wherever a theocracy exists, and we are going to expand on that later. So that concept is in conflict with the philosophical journey of human civilization for thousands of years. And today's term, in 21st century, when we have actually learned to respect each other's differences, the secularism in its true essence becomes the need of the hour. So I think that is why it's very important today.
Now, you're saying in the 21st century, secularism is very important, but we have 57 Islamic nations, right? And just a handful of 10 or something, they come in the top bracket, where I think the highest is probably, according to my research, it's Tajikistan with 96% of Islam, and the lowest seems to be Albania and Bosnia with just 56 and 50% respectively, right? So when
Right.
you're talking about secularism, where we know that a certain group will come up and govern with its own laws, which would not be nice for the minorities, how do you figure with these 57 Islamic nations? The Muslim, I mean, Muslim and secularism, this is the question which will come from, non-Muslims, Muslims, everybody. Islam, secularism seems like a non sequitur, right? So elaborate on that first of
Mhm.
all, right? Islam and secularism.
Okay, sure. So I think a very, I think, relevant question, because when we are discussing about the importance of secularism in 21st century, and we are also looking at a number of theocracies in the name of Islam that are uh, visible and that are functioning today. So how do we react to that? I think that is very important. So, first of all, I would say that when it comes to Islam and secularism, the relationship is very interesting. It has a very love-hate relationship in a way that there are different interpretations within the same religion. While majority of the Muslim majority countries today say that the Islam has to have a monopoly over the governing of the laws, irrespective of the minority. But very interestingly, there are examples where Muslims in large numbers actually uh, appealed to it and adapted to the secular thought. We have an example in the ancient history, we can say the Umayyads, the ancient history of Islam. They, while not being perfect or while not being actually strictly secular in today's definition, but still the religion was not the central part of the governance of the Umayyad caliphate, which was, of course, taken over
Medieval
by the
history.
Abbasid.
Medieval
Yeah,
history.
medieval
Right.
history. Yeah.
Ah.
So at that time, yeah, we can say. So after that, we also have philosophers and thinkers within Muslim tradition. Ibn Rushd, for example, has written on secularism on against the Asharite school of thought, which was actually becoming very strong at that time. The Mu'tazilites were again other example of that school of thought, which was sort of secular or liberal in that sense. So there is a history, but after that there is a long gap of after Averroes and after the publishing of the book by Al-Ghazali, for example, Incoherence of the Philosophers, which attacked these notions basically. After that, I would say the resurgence of this idea, because like I said, the idea of secularism is so natural to humankind that whenever religious people coexist somewhere, the idea comes to their mind. So even when it was, you know, suppressed for centuries, it again came out, whether in the form of Arab nationalism, for example. There are Arab nationalist thinkers which are unfortunately not very popular in today's Muslim discourse. Abdur Rahman Al Kawakibi is a very good example, Syrian born author. He has
Taha,
actually written Al
Taha,
Taha and Taha Hussein from
Hussein.
Egypt.
Egypt leads in that,
They-
right? Egypt leads in
Egypt
those
leads in that. Yes, yes.
secularist
And
thinkers.
exactly. And very interestingly, he has written, there is a book by him, Tabe al Istabdad. In that, he has written that uh, people can actually achieve a non religious national unity. And he also said that let us rule our lives in this world and let religion rule our lives in the next world, which has a connotation that we can rule our lives by actually law based on laws that are based on logic and reason. So that thought actually happened in late 19th century, and he died in 1902, I guess. And he actually influenced Jamal Abdul Nasser of Egypt, who was again a secularist name in the Muslim world, unfortunately one of the few. And then we have the example of Turkey also. So we see that there are examples both in the history of Islam, and we can even say it ancient history of Islam, because Islam only began in the 6th century. So for the sake of saying it,
When
or
you when
you
you
can see even,
when you portray it like that, it seems as
yeah,
if
we can
there is a pushback. There is a kind of resistance to theocracy and being secular, realizing that
being
we have to
secular.
coexist with other countries, realizing we have to coexist with other cultures and communities. So all that you portray
Right.
in this way, that there have been thinkers, there is a movement. It seems a pushback. It seems a fight for
Pushback.
secularism, right? A fight
Very
for secularism.
naturally. It yes, it will always come because it is very natural. It will actually always come. And so basically why I delved into the history of secular thought in Islam is because because we have to acknowledge that there are several strands of schools of thought within Islam that are not completely contradictory to secularism, because the examples actually exist. So I would say that since that thought has not actually come out in a very powerful way, in a very global way, or even today it is limited to 10, 11 countries like you mentioned, including Kazakhstan and all. So, but the thought exists. So we can actually we acknowledge that exists. Now the problem is that how do we deal with the large number of theocracies that exist
Which
in
brings me
today's
to
world?
the next question. You want to argue against theocracy, right? Uh,
Uh,
for me, as a dissenter, as a skeptic, from a Muslim heritage, I'm a heretic too. Theocracy is obviously bad. There shouldn't be any question about it, right? But
mhm,
there is a Christian point of view. They feel that even though theocracy is awful and abusive, they also feel that it's blasphemous to God. The NYT
mhm.
columnist Bret Stephens calls Iran a klepto theocracy, from klepto, maniacs, like stealing
Mhm.
theocracy.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
he says that the claim to divine authority in Iran is used to financially fleece their own people of money and property, which is true of every
Mhm,
theocracy, right?
mhm,
There shouldn't even be an argument whether it's good or bad. But let's hear your view.
mhm.
Let's hear your view, against theocracies.
Okay, okay. So basically, the biggest argument I would say against theocracy is that, in fact, it is rooted in a misconception. When someone
Yeah,
says that
because
he is
theocracy,
against
yeah, because theocracy basically means rule of God. Simple,
rule of
right?
God,
Rule of
yes,
God, right?
yes,
Ah,
yes. Exactly. So the misconception is that if someone stands against theocracy, it is misconstrued into saying that he is against the concept of your religion
mm,
or is against your God, which is actually not the case.
right.
Secularism is, like I mentioned in the beginning also, and of course by the person who coined the term, that it is not anti-religion, and it is especially not anti your religion. That is a paranoia that is being created against secularism, that it wants to get rid of the world from all religions. So basically, the argument is that the root cause of secularism is not going against your religion or your God, but basically promoting the coexistence of two people who believe in different gods with the same amount of faith in them. So actually, one has to only acknowledge that someone's faith can be as important to him as my faith is as important to me, and my and laws that govern my personal life cannot govern the laws that his personal life. So I think that
Vice,
if that
vice,
peaceful coexistence,
vice versa.
yeah,
Vice versa. Your faith might be important to you as my non-faith is to me, right? Vice versa,
yes,
right?
vice versa,
Continue,
right?
continue,
So it,
continue.
yeah, so basically you can say that you can't do this because I can't do this because my God doesn't allow it. That is your freedom of religion. But when someone says you can't do it because my God doesn't allow, that the two things don't connect. There is no logical causation relation effect between these two things. So basically, when you are implementing a theocracy, you are in one sentence saying that you can't do this because my God doesn't allow it, the God that I have belief in. So this, when put it like this, so theocracy can be summed up actually in this one sentence. So when put it like this, it does not sound very sound. It does not sound logical and rational in that sense. So whether it's today, or like I said, this thought has emerged many times in history, and it will keep emerging wherever theocracies exist. Even today, there are writers who are in jail, who are being persecuted in Egypt, and Raif al-Badawi, for example, and Lujain al-Hatlul in Saudi Arabia. They are liberal thinkers who are being persecuted because they are the flag bearers of that rebellion, of that resurgence. That God, the relation between you and God is very personal, while the laws are very public. These two things cannot mix. If I like wearing a blue shirt, I cannot mandate that every person my age should wear a blue shirt. So that is the philosophical foundation upon which the secularism stands. And that is why I think the theocracies are redundant in today's time.
Uh, so we come to my favorite part, uh, secularism in ancient India. Sarva Dharma Sambhava, which meant all religions are harmonious with each other and lead to God. Thus, one can follow the path he or she chooses to be. In fact, the history of India is known to everybody, right? It was 100% Hindu nation in the Vedic ages, and
Mhm.
Buddhism swept this 100% Hindu majority, and it, I think, was a Buddhist majority nation for 500 years, right? Even
Mhm.
when the resurgence of Hinduism came, like the Gupta period, the Guptas were very patronizing to the Buddhists also, developing all these Buddhist viharas and everything. So India has, in since ancient times, been secular, right? What do you have to say to that?
A very rich history, actually. Of course, Indian history is very rich in many terms. But when it comes to secular thought or the secular school of thought within religion, I can confidently say that Indian civilization stands alone in that respect. That it not only introduced a secular thought, it introduced a secular thought within a faith system. Otherwise, the secular thoughts that have emerged elsewhere, they usually started as a rebellion against the status quo, against the state
Church.
mandate of the religion. So in India, for example, uh, in Rig Veda, there is a Nasidiya Sukta, which is also called Hymn of Creation. So it has that liberal thought, that agnostic thought, or that secular nature of questioning. It says that when was this universe created, and who has created it, and if God has created it, did He come with the universe, or did He exist before that? Or if He has, then when did He arise? So it is questioning the very origin of the universe, the very idea of God, actually, in itself, which is not strictly secular, but it has the liberal connotations that upon which the secularism stands. So apart from that, the very well known the Charvak school of thought, for example, while not being strictly secular in today's terms, but it is still had very agnostic themes and very encompassing and tolerant of other faiths or other deities. So that school of thought has always existed, whether it was Ashoka, for example, ancient in Indian history. He also had a very secularist uh, way of governance. Then Buddha, for example, that is also, like you mentioned, another example. So that thought has always been present in Indian civilization and in the texts that were composed thousands of years ago. Even before then, the ancient classical Greece was experimenting with these ideas, even 1,000 years before that. So it has a very ancient history, but how it got changed over time is another tale. That after the Islamic invasion, for example, the thought changed, and it had an influence on the Hindu thought, of course. And
Yes.
today we have reached somewhere else. The thought that existed in its infant stage, it got changed into an amalgamated into multiple various things, and now it has become a completely different thing of today's Indian secularism. We can come to that later, but I think yes, the secular thought has existed for thousands of years in ancient India, and it's time we actually talk about it.
So
So
you're
that is there.
saying, so you're saying that the Western secularism is different from the Indian secularism? Is that what you're saying? There's a difference?
Uh, yes, that is the difference, and actually, the Western secularism, like we had discussed, it is the complete indifference and separation. And while because I think the today's version of Indian secularism, we can actually come to that right now. It is not uh, adopted from the West. Actually, it is uh, sort of like appeasing all religions or embracing or tolerating all religions instead of being indifferent to them. So there's a very different approach, which has its roots in the philosophy that developed over thousands of years. So that is there. But it is different in a way only because how secularism developed in the West, it was a rebellion to the religion. While how secularism developed in East or in India, for example, is within the folds of the religion, and that is why it does not have that hostile approach. It does not have that exclusivist approach towards religion or secularism. It says that both can exist together.
Could it be because if you see the US secularism, the approach of the US and the French approach, even though they are diametrically opposite, they all felt that religion oppressed the individual or the community. The US approach is obviously protecting a group of people who were persecuted by religion, hence they immigrated to the New World, right? And the
That's right.
French had this thing. They have this complete notion of religion oppressing the individual's rights. So in both cases, they
Right.
feel religion oppresses whether the individual or the group, the community. India doesn't have that thing. I think it could be the difference because our religions are all encompassing. Okay, if I want to be a Hindu,
Right.
no issues. If I want to convert to Buddhism, no issues, right? Except when the monotheistic religions came, because they were more about proselytizing. So we are not talking about the Islamic invasions. We are talking pre that. Everything was encompassing. Even Sikhism, for that matter, developed out of Hinduism, right? And just
Mhm.
for a brief period, it was known as heresy, but then eventually all the gurus are respected, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
about
Right.
indigenous religions that developed in India. So there is this harmonious thing, there is this encompassing thing that anybody can. Probably that's the difference. Probably they don't think
Right.
of religion
Right.
as an oppressing force, whereas in the West it's
Right.
always been persecution and oppression in the name of religion. Could that be the main
Mm-hmm.
difference? Could that be the main
That
difference?
would be the that you summed up very well. I would say I think that is actually the main difference, and I would actually add that when it comes to the difference between, like I said, the Western secularism and Indian secularism today is uh, it's very flawed in a way. The Indian secularism, we can actually come to that the flaws of
We are
Indian
going to
secularism,
discuss the flaws in secularism.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
flaws. So I think the flaws are that when it comes to encompassing or tolerating religions, which is a beautiful thought in itself, nothing against that thought, but you cannot actually pick and choose between encompassing and tolerating and governing and non-governing of
Right.
different religions. So that is where the problem comes in. Either you adopt the Western form of secularism, which is the complete separation of church and state, where the state does not govern anything about your religion. Or you can, if you want to embrace or tolerate or govern or not govern, then it has to be equal to all religions. So the problem with India is that after the formation of the Indian Republic and after the partition, the secularism was adopted not in its entirety. It was adopted as on paper, as a term only, but not in its essence. So that is where the problem comes in, and how we see that the demonization of the word secularism is happening today, and especially in Indian politics, because the word secularism uh, has come to mean something which it is not. It has come to mean the appeasement of the minorities. It has come to mean that the state has to genuflect or give in to certain communities. And that is where the problem comes in.
I want to illustrate what you said just now with an example. I was reading Rahul Roshan's book. I don't know if you've been through that. A Sangi who never went to a shaka, and his
Hmm.
description of his life throughout the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, I can totally relate to that. Why? Because
Right.
he talks about secularism in India during these decades as appeasement of Muslims and the Hindu
Hmm.
as a sleeping it's a one-way street. There has been secularism only one way. Do you think this is a
One
major
way.
flaw of India's secularism?
That is a flaw, of course, major flaw. And why it is a big problem is that if this keeps happening,
Hmm.
if the demonization of the word secularism keeps happening like this, like it is happening, it can actually give force and strength to those who actually want to establish a theocracy, for example, in India,
Right.
right? So you cannot let that happen. So now the need of the hour is for people who believe in actual secularism, not the Indian version that is happening today. They have to take up the mantle and demand for actual secular adoption of, for example, the civil code, the uniform civil code. Because
Absolutely.
if that does not happen, then this maligning and the mudslinging over the word secularism will keep happening till it will become a bastardized term, and which I think we are too late in that. It has already
It's already
become.
become.
And a person, yeah, and a person who is completely secular by nature does not want to be called a secularist,
Yes.
because today that does not mean what he wants it to mean. And that is how the forces that are actually anti-secular are getting strengthened, and they will get strengthened over time. So this is the biggest problem. So if that does not happen, so whether any political party stands up to it, or any leader stands up to it, or any civil society, an NGO, I don't know, someone with a law background would be able to illustrate on it better. I'm not an expert on that, but I think someone needs to take up the mantle and raise this demand, so that at least we can adopt this idea of secularism, which is based upon the liberal thought and the liberal principles which are actually embedded in the Indian civilization for centuries. We have to preserve that. So that is why I'm very much against and very critical of the flaws of the Indian secularism.
Well, you and me are both doing our 2 cents, to bring about this
Yeah,
correct term, secularism. Right? Thank you so much for
yeah,
being here, and you have really shed light on a lot of things. I hope you join us again, and
yeah.
I
I
would
would
really
love
like to
to. It has
continue
been
the
a very
discussion.
hearty. Yeah, it has been a very good experience, and having these discussions is always amazing. You get to learn also. So thank you for having me, and thanks a
Welcome.
lot. It's been a
Welcome.
thank you.